Yo, we are going to be talking about some interesting things tonight. We're going to be talking about tubes versus kayaks, pontoon boats, and etc. With Matthew Brannon, and then we're going to go touch on tackling huge lakes, for instance, Kentucky Lake, La Crosse, the Delta, perhaps, and various river systems. Then we're going to go into like start of the Yakabass Club, how it got started and how Matthew Brannon helped out with that, and how the whole kayak community came about in California. And then also we're going to touch up on the famous topic of banning forward-facing sonar, as well as using it as a tool, and Matthew Brannon's first experience with a first year of using forward-facing sonar. So hope you guys enjoy this episode. Like I said, this is 6, not 7, because the previous interviewee that I had on the podcast, his audio, he had some internet and audio issues, so we'll be redoing that one as well. And future podcasts, I'm going to be testing it out on a live platform using StreamYard. I think I'll be just keeping it in the YouTube social media. So hope you guys enjoy this, and let me get to the podcast. What up, guys? We're back at another episode with Matthew Brannon, episode number 7 for the Double Digit Angler podcast. And boy, we have some good content to dish out for you today. Let me lower the music. So yeah, we've been talking a little bit, Matt. You were talking about how you're going to do the BOS, Hobie BOS, and you're thinking about doing La Crosse, but then it's on the same date as the West Coast Championship.
It is. Yep. This year that fell on the same weekend as the West Coast Championship, and I live an hour from the Delta, and I'd be crazy to pass up because of the money that's involved in that weekend with the West Coast Championship and the Chris Laird and all that stuff. It's basically equal winnings if you fish here versus traveling.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd be crazy to leave here to go fish somewhere else. So.
Oh yeah, how much was it? First place for West Coast Championship came in. Rasmussen won, right?
Yep. I want to say, man, it had to be close to 20 grand that he took. 18 grand for some reason. What rings a bell? I could be way off, but
I think he had big fish too. So he had he had won 18 grand with the overall and big fish.
All the tournaments. And
then he also placed in the trail series somewhere.
Well, that's what I mean. I think his total take home was like 18 grand for the weekend.
Total? Okay.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
And then there was Pat Wilson, which I know from the Sonoma County Belly Boat Bass Club. He's all in for kayaks. We had actually a talk on day 3, and we were just like, in order to promote fishing to new anglers, just have to open your limitations to kayakers and etc. Oh, yeah. So that way we can make a positive impact in the community.
They finally saw the light.
Yeah, well, Pat Wilson did, and it's his first year kayaking. So I thought that was incredible for him to pull off a KBF Pro Series, his first roundabout in a non-motorized kayak, an Old Town PDL.
Yep. Well, and that may be a different podcast or a subject for a different podcast, but a lot of the Sonoma County guys now have swapped over to kayaks. There's probably, I think of 7 or 8 right off the top of my head, them and Bass and Tubes combined.
Right. So, yeah. I think things are going to change for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the kayak side is just well outpaced the tube side as far as tournaments and money winning and that type of competition level. So, yeah, they swapped over.
Well, we were talking about La Crosse, and I wanted to bring up a big question about that is, how do you go about practicing 25 miles of water? That's way bigger than, I'd say, Clear Lake. I think that's bigger than the Delta too, is it?
I wouldn't say it's more than the Delta. It's probably equivalent. Of course, it depends on how the Delta tournament's set up. If they're only letting you fish Contra Costa County or whatever.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a wild thing. We actually planned that trip based around the Women's Fishing Federation that Amanda runs. They had an event, and because Christine Fisher is also one of the I guess the board members of that, her schedule, she was going to be in La Crosse for the Hobie BOS and an AFCO event. And so they scheduled the Women's Fishing Federation event that year up there at La Crosse. So we were actually there. I guess we were there for about a week prior to the Hobie BOS tournament. I didn't fish the whole time because I worked the event with Amanda, teaching classes and helping with the women's event. But I think I pre-fished for about 4 days.
Yeah.
And just picked random pools. Like I said, I had been there once before for a KBF event back in the day, and I fished the Black River, I believe is what it was, which is right in the middle of La Crosse for that event. But that was a wintertime event, and this was a summer event, so I wanted to fish more shallow water. So I just picked a random pool and went fishing. We actually stayed in the house with Christine Fisher and Matthew Scotch and Guillermo Gonzalez for that trip. And I told them, we'd fish for the day, and I'd come home, and they're like, "How'd you do?" I said, "Well, I got like 72 inches, 75 inches, something like that." I said, "But it's not going to be enough to win." And it didn't matter. I fished 4 or 5 different ramps, and it was all I was putting up the same fish in each ramp. And G kept telling me, he's like, "Man, if you can do that during an event, you'll be sitting pretty good." And I'm thinking, there's no way. I guess most other places where I fish, 90 inches would be the minimum to be, at the top.
Yeah.
And I just wasn't expecting 75 inches to be able to compete. And it did. I found a place, I'm not going to say where it was, but I found a place where there was 2 creeks that came together with a shallow bar in the middle, and it was stacked with largemouth and smallmouth. And 2 days I fished that one spot, pretty much anchored down with a power pole, making I can't even stress this enough, making the exact same cast over and over and over, and I probably caught 130 fish in 2 days out of that spot.
Oh, wow.
So they were
very often, does it, for you?
No, I'm a power fisherman.
There's probably less than a handful of times where I make the same exact cast, and you're pulling like over 20 fish in less than 2 or 3 hours. How many times have that happened to you?
Not very often. And matter of fact, on day one, I started in that spot, and I caught, I think, like 69, 70 inches out of it. And then I left. I had a couple other spots that had caught some better fish in. And so I moved and hit those other spots. They were probably 2-3 miles away. And it worked great. I upgraded a couple times, finished out the day. I think I was in 4th place on day one, which is about where I like to be. I like to be in that top 3 to 5.
Yeah.
And day 2, I told myself, I said, I'm going to go back to that spot where I started. I'm going to put up 72 inches. I'll fish it until I hit 72 inches, and then I'll leave. And I did that. I hit, I think, 74 inches in the first 2 hours of the event, and I was leading. But as I'm bad about watching the standings, and Russ Snyder's was right behind me coming up. And so, I got the nerves going, and I bailed and I went to my big fish spots, but we had a big storm that week and the river blew out. So it turned into chocolate milk. My other big fish spots were all blown out. And so I ended up going back to where I started, put the stakeout pole out, that power pole stakeout pole, and just literally camped the rest of the day. It worked out. I think I only won by like 2 inches, I think.
So what event was this?
That was the Hobie BOS at La Crosse.
And that was last year?
I think it was last year. Yeah, because I ended up 2 years ago.
Nice.
Yeah, Amanda says 2 years ago. But that's how I got into the TOC that last November.
I feel like I'm so new to kayak fishing because I didn't realize you're such a hammer in all the circuits. I never seen your name on Hobie BOS or.
Well, I've only fished 3 Hobie BOS events. I fished Gunnersville in Alabama in 2000, I think it was 18, and I took 3rd, which qualified me for the TOC, but I couldn't go. I was on a ship in South Carolina. The Coast Guard had me on a ship at that point, and we were underway for the TOC, so I didn't make the TOC that year. Then I fished the La Crosse event and won it up there, and that got me to the TOC. I think it was 2020. And I went to Lake Eufaula in Alabama and fished their TOC. That's the only 3 Hobie events I fished.
Oh, okay. So you're always you haven't had a year where you could just dedicate to one circuit, really.
Not to those. I actually, James Snyder and myself and Brian Butterball actually started Yakabass back in the day.
Yeah, you were telling me about that.
Yep.
We were having a good discussion over at the American Bass Camp Zone.
So back then, Yakabass is what I fished when I was here the first time. And then I guess I started at KBF in 2010. And that was the first year that Chad did live events. And that's where I actually started in the kayaks. And I fished quite a few KBF events. But then I had moved out here in 2013, and kayak bass fishing was kind of an unknown thing. So.
Oh, okay. Sweet. So it was like you and James Snyder made a positive impact and helped out freshwater kayak fishing pretty much.
Oh, yeah. I got out here in 13, and I got on NorCal Kayak Anglers. They do like multi-species events, and I fished a few of them. But what I like is bass fishing, and that's what I wanted to do. So I gauged the interest on the NCK forum. A lot of people said they would do it, and I did the research on how to start an event, how to do the permits out here in California, and was working through that process. And another guy reached out to me, and he's like, "Hey, man," he goes, "I'm doing the same thing. Will you come fish my events, and just try and support me so we're not trying to split up everybody?" And I said, sure. And that's what I guess became Delta Kayak Bass Series.
Okay. Nice.
So that only lasted for 2 years, and then that guy quit holding the events. And when all that went down, James and we had fished those events, and that's where I met him. And we were actually pedaling back from White Slough one day and just chatting. And, I told him, I said, man, we can start our own events. I've already done the legwork on how to get it going.
Yeah.
So we sat down, and like I said, we got Brian Butterball involved. He doesn't do the kayak thing anymore. He's in a boat now. But the 3 of us kind of got down and made a plan. And then Justin Del Campo, he actually came in with us on that whole project when it first started. And that became like the board members for Yakabass when it originally started. And I fished Yakabass pretty hard up until 2017. I think was the last year I fished Yakabass. So, and then when I left, I guess 2018 must have been when it kind of blew up, and we started getting over 100 anglers per event for the Yakabass tournaments.
Yeah, and that event keeps on pulling 100 minimum.
Yep. James has done a good job.
Yep, definitely. But before we get off track, I kind of wanted to. So you didn't really answer my question about how you cover water and practice for 25 miles. Like, all you told me was you just launched at several different lots, basically, or pools. Mm-hmm. Like, so you didn't really have a strategy. You just kind of just went fishing.
I did a lot of online research before we went. Mm-hmm. Lacrosse. I mean, everybody fishes lacrosse, all the big boat circuits. Matter of fact, MLF was there the weekend before the Hobie tournament. So we went to the weigh-ins, and Amanda and a couple of the girls worked one of the kids' events for MLF. So, so I watched their coverage to see what they were doing. It's a shallow water grass fishery. It's not tidal, but it's current driven because it's Mississippi River. That's what I grew up on in South Carolina. And so that is one of my strengths. And I'm a power fisherman, and that place suits that very well. You can throw bladed jigs, spinner baits, frogs, and just cover water. And that's what I did. I found a few key areas at each of the ramps where I went, and ended up moving to the area where I ended up competing. I went down there because there was nobody there. At the boat landing where I launched, I think Adam Reiser and I were the only 2 that launched there both days of the event. And Adam and I have been friends for a long time, and we actually, I think it was day 2, I told Adam at the launch, I said, hey man, if you want to be straight with me and tell me where you're going to start, I will not go that direction. And so we set up a little plan. He went one way and I went the other, and I never saw another kayaker the entire tournament.
Okay. So that one of the key tactics in your practice is making sure you have the spot to yourself, really.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I don't like to fish around people. Yeah. And so like when Yakabass first started, we would have these shotgun launches. Mm-hmm. And back then, very few people were in pedal kayaks. It was a lot of paddle kayaks. And the guys used to laugh at me because when we would launch, I would take off and I would go 4 to 5 miles before I started fishing just to have that buffer zone between me and everybody else.
And yakka bass, their start time is during launch time? Like you could fish right away?
Yeah, back then it was.
Yeah, so you actually gave up some fishing time.
I did.
To make a 4-mile run. Yeah. To be away from the other people. Okay. My other question, so do you think someone from, let's say, from the West Coast could go drive out to La Crosse for the first time and they'll be fine as long as they cover enough water during practice with a bladed jig or your spinner bait or your, LV 500? Do you think they would have a good chance at competing?
I mean, bass are bass. The same lures work all across the country. Growing up, I was a tackle junkie. I had to have every color of every bait. Anymore, I don't do that. I kind of learned pretty quick that it was too expensive to do it that way. And if you have, your base colors, they work around the country. So that's not a problem. I know people from Northern California that have the Delta here. We have such a diverse fishery with the Delta and Clear Lake and the Highland reservoirs and all that it makes for a versatile angler no matter where you go. SoCal, I'm not as familiar with the lakes down in SoCal. I know y'all have Otay down there, and it is a grass lake. So guys that can fish Otay and as well as go into like San Vicente, which is, that deep, clear, rock type stuff. Yeah. As long as you're proficient at both, traveling is not a big deal. Like I said, it's bass or bass. Doesn't matter where you're at. What's your biggest tip for someone? Because I went over to Kentucky Lake and it is large compared to Cattle Lake. Like I would have been happy if it was like the size of Cattle Lake, because that wasn't too bad for me. Cattle Lake, it was manageable. But then when I saw Kentucky, and how big it was, they call that a river, and I'm like, that is intimidating, ain't it? That's very intimidating, and kind of had the wheels spinning out, but I was still trying to stay calm during the KBF National Championship. How many launches did you fish at Kentucky Lake? I think I did 3 or 4 launches, and I felt like I should have done probably 2 per day. I would have picked one area and just broke it down. So my best finish at the national championship on Kentucky Lake was a year when we went down there. We pre-fished. It was Amanda was fishing with me at that point. She was competing. We pre-fished, hit a bunch of different ramps. Didn't really put anything together. We caught fish at each one, but nothing major. Yeah. And the night before the tournament, she asked me, she said, "Where are we going?" I pulled out a map of Kentucky Lake, and I just pointed. I said, "Right there." And she's like, "That's in Kentucky. We don't even have Kentucky fishing license." I said, "Well, we're getting them." Yeah. Never been there. Hadn't even seen the ramp. And we drove to the ramp that morning and put in. And it was, I'll tell you, it was it the Blood River, dear? I think it was Blood River is what it's called. It's in Kentucky. That's a big area. Yeah. I don't think we went more than 2 miles from that ramp that day. And it took me, and of course now I had her fishing too. So it was 2 people covering water. But it took me most of the first day of the event to figure out the key pattern. And then once I figured that out, day 2, we knocked the lights out. It was unreal. The problem was on day 1, it took me so long to figure something out that I ended up in like 100 and I think it was in 120th place or something like that. And I kind of wrote myself off because I was so far down. That was the year we had 768 kayakers showed up or something like that. It was like in the mid 700s. Yeah. And that's what happened that time. Every ramp we went to, there was like 60 people at. Wow. And I don't like to fish around people, so I just picked a spot. We went to it, and we didn't have that many people there. There might have been 10 people fished out of that ramp. Okay. But like I said, I ended up in like 120th on the first day, so I kind of wrote myself off. Day 2, I caught it like a 21.5 on my first cast. I caught a 20-incher on my third cast. What year was this? And I was like, oh, sweet. Let's see. We were living in California. Must have been like 2016. Was Kentucky still a ledge lake? No. Or was still the carp? The carp had destroyed it by then. It was fishing better than it has in the last couple of years. Yeah. Okay. But it has definitely gone downhill. Okay. We caught our fish shallow on points. It was, this was I think it snowed on us that year during practice. I mean, it was cold, and we found our fish dragging Picasso football jigs on points, rock points.
Okay.
But I murdered them that day, that second day, and
Yeah.
I was not netting fish. I was boat flipping everything. I was breaking fish off because I was trying to force them to the boat. I lost like a 7. I had a bass boat beside me, and I'd stuck one about 7 pounds, and it had broke me off. And the guy's like, "Hey man, you just lost a giant." I'm like, "No big deal." I said, "I'm so far out of the standings, it doesn't matter."
Yeah.
And we come in, and sure enough, I ended up in like 24th or 25th place overall. And I was like, "Man." I mean, I didn't have a shot at winning, but I could have been somewhere around 10th or 12th if I'd have paid attention and actually, netted my fish.
You cut a check.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. I cut a couple checks for that one.
I mean, you probably made the biggest leap there was on that day.
Yeah, I had on day 2, I think I had the biggest 5 fish limit of the event on day 2.
Wow.
So yeah, we had a good time. I mean, it was a good time fishing. I mean, we were catching 18 to 20 inch fish nonstop.
That's your biggest tip: is pick one launch ramp, even if you had 3 days of practice.
I mean, I hit a couple different launches at La Crosse. I hit, I think, 3 ramps at La Crosse
during practice.
During practice, over 4 days.
And then you're just like, I'm just gonna stick with one launch ramp and during practice.
Yep.
Of that big of water and just focus on that area.
There's so many fish. Christine did give me a little advice. I don't know whether she knew it or not. So she got on a big smallmouth bite. I'm not a smallmouth fisherman. I had caught some during practice, and she had made the comment that in La Crosse you can't count on smallmouth. So during pre-fish, if I got on a good smallmouth bite, I made note of where it was, but it's not like I chose that as my starting point. And I know a lot of people in that tournament got burned because they banked on the smallmouth. And like I said, day 2, we had all the chocolate milk after that storm, and the smallmouth bite went away.
Oh, they don't like that, huh?
Nope, they're sight feeders.
Damn, that's the top secret of Matthew Brannon, guys.
No, that was a Christine Fisher secret.
Well, not that, but like stick to.
Oh yeah, pick an area.
Pick an area and just stay in that area and just dissect it until you get bit.
Mm-hmm.
And are you so once you get bit, you catch your first fish during practice, and it's like 2 days or 1 day before the tournament. Are you making another cast and checking if there's a number 2?
Absolutely. I get fussed at. Amanda does not like it, but I don't shake fish in practice. I catch every fish that bites. Now, if I go into an area and I get bit, I will throw back again. If I catch 2, usually I'll leave that area alone. But I'm not shaking fish. I just go fishing.
So you catch 2 at minimum before you make a decision whether if it's a good place or not.
Yeah.
Depending.
1 can be lucky, 2's a pattern. Yeah.
2's a pattern. Yep. Man, I've been telling Greg Ellingson, he was my partner over at the KBF National Championship. I was like, don't stick another fish, man. Don't stick. That could be your 4th or 5th fish of the day during
it
tournament.
Could, but and the reason I don't shake fish is that my mindset is, what, especially like here, you fished Clear Lake before.
Mm-hmm.
You're just taking turns on spots. If you don't catch that next fish that bites and you shake him off, the next guy comes is going to catch him anyway.
He's going to catch him. Yeah.
There's so many fish in the water, and that's one thing. I've been fishing livescope this year. It's my first year with livescope, and that is one of the things that I've learned is the number of fish in the water will blow your mind. And traditional sonar, you don't get to see how many fish are there on traditional sonar, but when you turn on a livescope or the forward-facing sonar, whatever brand you want, it's unreal how many fish are actually there. How many fish will come look at your bait and not touch it that you don't know about?
Well, that leads me to our next topic of the day, of the night. And I'm glad that you mentioned livescope because I don't know. Did I mention to you that I wanted to talk about livescope with you?
Yeah, you did.
Did I?
Yeah.
For tonight's topic?
Uh-huh.
Okay. What do you think about livescope? Tell me what you think about it. Does it stay or does it go? And I hate to talk about livescope because, I get a few comments saying it ain't winning if you're using livescope. What is your take on it?
It's straight up cheating. It is not the end all be all of catching fish. Having livescope is not going to make you go out and win every tournament that you fish by any means. it sounds redundant. Everybody else is saying the same thing. What you learn about fish behavior is probably more of a key than anything. I can tell you, I fished New Maloney's. I went to New Maloney's one of the first days that I had that on the boat this year. And I was over there. I was fishing a monthly or something. You know what? It was the Iron Man or the Working Man series.
Working Man series.
Yep. I went over there and night fished, and it was crazy. I turned on the forward-facing sonar. Of course, that's a spotted bass fishery. There's spotted bass everywhere. I was in like 18 feet of water. I put in right before dark, and I started catching them on a jerkbait right off the bat. Nothing big, 14-inch fish. The sun went down, and I tell everybody this, and it's like watching a movie. I watched the fish on my screen go from that 18 feet of water when the sun was still up, even though it was dusk. I watched them move from 18 feet of water to 2 feet of water. I mean, literally watched the migration of fish go to the bank as soon as that sun went down. And that was crazy.
Now, go deeper into the story. Were you positioned on them, and did you just turn your transducer towards them while they were moving?
I was sitting. It's a sunken island basically. There used to be a sunken island. Now it's up out of the water because the water's so low. I was sitting off a point on this island, and there was a nice school of fish. There was a few scattered fish here and there, but there was definitely a mass of fish that I was working with the jerkbait. And when that sun went down, there was no wind or anything. It was just a beautiful day. When the sun went down, I watched the fish start to move, and I was like, okay, so what's going on? I'm panning back and forth and literally watched them move up into 2 feet of water. And I spent the rest of the night running bank in 5 feet and less.
And you caught them good on shallow.
I crushed them. I think I had 3 spots over 20 inches that night.
So that's crazy, because I'd be fishing at Clear Lake, and I'd be thinking the same exact thing. I think it was Memorial Day or Labor Day, and I was pitching into weed beds. This is back in 2004, and I was getting on a really hot bite, pitching and punching mats, grass mats, and etc. And I caught maybe 25 fish the whole day, 30 fish, and then I worked my way back to the launch ramp. Secret launch ramp. I'm not going to tell anybody where that launch ramp is.
Secret Brado's launch ramp.
I work my way back, and I literally pitch in my sweet beaver in less than a foot of water, and it seems like they just went super shallow, and fishing got super easy. Like almost every single cast they're biting.
So
I feel like, yeah. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I'm a huge night fisherman. That's my favorite way to fish for bass is at night. I can't tell you how many hours I've spent on Clear Lake at night. And it will blow your mind. You can throw your bait on the bank and have them literally try to beach themselves to get your lure. Yeah. And big fish, very big fish.
And they are not scared of being shallow over at that lake at all.
Not at all.
Even during the day.
The only fish that I have ever hooked that I know was a true double digit was at night in less than a foot of water on a swim bait.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I hooked her. It was, I think 2 summers ago, and she was probably in the 10 to 11 pound range and broke me off. But that fish, I was throwing a bull gill and burning it across this point in less than a foot of water, and she smoked it. And like I said, she broke me off right at the boat after I had turned my headlamp on and saw her. And the next cast, I had tied on an S-Waver 200 on the same rod and threw it across that point, and a fish hit in less than a foot of water again. And it was like, that's unreal that they would be up that shallow. But
was it a multi-jointed single glide bait or a wake bait?
The first one, the bull gill, is a multi-jointed. It's just like the bull shad, but it's just a gill profile.
Sinking bait, so you're pretty much burning it.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you burn it to where it wakes the surface. That's my favorite way to fish it.
So that's your reason why you have livescope, is to understand more about fishing behavior rather than I'm going to drop down on them every single time and find them. So what are some of the other reasons why you fish livescope, and why don't
I got livescope for one reason, because I got tired of getting beat on spotted bass lakes by guys who had forward facing sonar. I told Amanda that was the thing. It's out here, especially on the West Coast, because we have all these highland reservoirs and these clear, deep reservoirs. If you don't have some type of forward-facing sonar, you're shooting yourself in your foot. I mean, that's just the fact of the matter. Back east, shallow lakes, that type of stuff, yeah, you can compete without it with no problem. But
What specific lake are you talking about with the spotted bass?
New Maloney's, Berryessa, you name it, Folsom,
So those two
Comanche.
lakes, if you don't have live scope,
You're killing
your
yourself.
chance at cracking top five it significantly drops.
Look at San Vicente. That San Vicente tournament. I did not have live scope on my boat yet, and went down there, and I found plenty of fish in practice.
Yeah.
It was great fishing. I did pretty good in practice, and then come the tournament, I guess it was day 2 is when all the wakeboard boats showed up. Without live scope or without forward facing sonar, I didn't see those fish transition like you did, where they moved up off the bottom and were suspending. I had no clue. So I'm not a light line finesse guy at all, but I was catching a lot of fish on drop shot down on the bottom, on a shaky head on the bottom. And when those fish came up and started suspending because of all that boat traffic, I was fishing underneath them and didn't know it. And I put up 4 fish on that last day.
Yeah.
It killed me.
If you would have put up 5, you may crack top 10 or top 5.
Yeah, I'd have been up there. Because I had a couple good fish both days that I caught on frog, and I would have definitely been up there if I had one more fish on that final day.
And that's why I think everybody should have live scope, is because at least you could possibly find a fish that you can pull up on and have an efficient day of fishing, rather than blind casting and you're still on number 4 and you're just like, you could be fishing dead water, you know?
Well, and it's like New Maloney's, when I won that event at New Maloney's this year, that was a live scope event. I caught some fish over 130 feet of water out in the middle of the lake. It was just 1 and 2 fish that were out there roaming on bait. And I would just, with the torpedo on, I just ride around scanning until I saw one and then cast at him. And single fish, not schools.
Wow. So. Single fish. That was my case over at San Vicente. And it seems like when they do suspend, they're ready to eat. Like there's only one reason for them suspending out there in the middle of nowhere.
It's bait.
Yeah, it's bait, and they're just waiting for something to come by and pin them up to the surface or something. Somehow. So now that we're on the topic of live scope, what we got? So, is there any crazy stories that you have? Well, so how did you win? Go deeper into that story.
At Maloney's?
At New Maloney's. Was it a magical day where you're just like, oh my gosh, every single fish is spending that I'm facing are biting?
So I love New Maloney's. We fished there in the past. We haven't fished there that much this time that we lived out here, but when we lived out here the first time, that was one of Amanda's favorite lakes to go to. So I spent some time over there, and I know, like the bridge column. Everybody knows that you go up the river to the bridge and you fish the bridge columns for spots that are up against the pylons. And I did that both days of the tournament. I did that in practice. So I did catch some key fish on a Magnum flutter spoon up against the bridge columns. And then once that sun would come up, and usually after the first 2 or 3 boats hit the bridge columns, that bite died. And then I would just roam around finding those open water fish. And then in practice, the last day of practice, I came back to the marina, which is pretty close to the ramp, and there's a set of tractor tires that are floating. They use it as like a breakwater, basically.
I did see that. Did you put that on your story?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, tell me about that.
I went down, man, those tires run a couple 100 yards worth of tires, and they're big. These tires are probably 4 foot in diameter. And I went down them with live scope and actually scan the tires themselves, and I could see fish inside the tires. And those tires float over 100 feet of water. But they attract bait, and those fish were keying on that bait. And so day 1, I fished the bridge column. Then I went to my open water pattern and caught the rest of my fish. And then coming back to the ramp, because it's a long run, it's like 4.5, 5 miles from the bridge back. I ended both days at those tires, and on day 1, I caught a 19 and a half inch spot off those tires, and literally saw the fish inside the tire and cast to him. And day 2, I caught a 20 and a half inch spot off those tires. Same thing. So
how much does it weigh? A 20 and a half inch spot?
4 pounds, somewhere in that neighborhood.
That's a huge spot. Yeah. So, is there a particular bait you wanna talk about, or does everybody know it already? Is it?
Yeah, I wasn't quiet about it with that tournament and livescope in general. Obviously, spoons work great. You can see them; they're dense. You can follow them pretty well. Those open water fish, I like to throw a jackall Daracoup tail spinner.
Yeah, is that your number one?
Absolutely.
What is your
Absolutely.
top? Go a little bit deeper into it. Like, what are your top 3 baits that like you like to use on livescope? That you feel like none of the competition really uses it because they don't put enough time into like
that tail spinner is definitely one. That tail spinner, it's an old school lure. The Man's Little George was the original. My dad cut his teeth in tournament fishing down at Lake Eufaula in Alabama, and that's where Mann's was. And so, he tells the story about Tom Mann selling them out of a coffee can in a truck. Because it's an old school bait, it just hasn't gotten that much exposure these days, or it's one of those things that died out. So not a lot of people use them anymore. I know Tactical Bass, and they highlight them every year in the wintertime as a winter bait. Throw it all the time with livescope.
Yeah.
So that's definitely number one, I would say. The big flutter spoons would probably be my number 2, like a Nichols, Lake Fork, or any of those big flutter spoons, 7-inch, 8-inch.
And do you not have a drop shot tied on your boat ever?
I don't even take a spinning rod 99% of the time I'm on the water.
Do you own a RoboWorm package?
I own piles of them. I also own bags of Ned rigs, but I don't ever throw them. I can't stand a Ned rig. I'm just not a finesse guy.
Would you zero out before you do
Absolutely.
that? Really?
Absolutely. I cannot stand a spinning rod. I didn't grow up doing that. Like I said, I grew up in the South. We fished shallow grass, 15, 20-pound test.
Mm-hmm.
I joked down there at San Vicente, I caught the bulk of my fish on 65-pound braid with a horny toad.
Wow.
That's pretty normal for me.
Yeah.
So I did, when we fished the TOC for ABA down at Lopez and Santa Margarita, I took a spinning rod both days. I threw it for maybe 5 minutes total, the whole trip.
Did it play a key role?
It did on the last day at Lopez, and Chris Harris and I had talked about it because I know he was throwing the spinning rod, and he told me, he's like, man, you got a drop shot. And I rigged up a drop shot for day 2. I had left it actually in his camper, and we were pulling out of the parking lot at the campground, and I went back and I told him, I said, I'm going to get it just because you and Amanda said that I had to take a spinning rod with me. And I caught a 20 and a quarter, was my first fish of the morning off a brush pile on a drop shot.
Wow. So, are you a believer now?
No, I put it down after that.
So it's very specific if you're going to do it.
I caught the bulk of my fish in that tournament on an A-rig and a football jig.
Yeah, I believe that. I believe that 100%. I wish I threw the A-rig more often during that tournament or during practice.
You'd be surprised. I caught a lot of 12-inch smallmouth on a 4.8 Kitech on an A-rig.
4.8? Wow. Yeah, those smallmouth are super aggressive.
I also caught a 19-inch crappie on that thing.
A 19? Damn. How much did that thing weigh? You didn't weigh it, though.
I didn't weigh it. No.
Probably.
It was a beast.
Easily
though.
Over 2, though.
Oh, yeah.
Close to 3.
I thought that was the fish I needed when he hit. I was like, oh, man. I mean, I could see him on the brush pile, and I threw that A-rig out there, and he smoked it. I thought it was a good largemouth, but...
Go deeper into your tailspin tactic, your technique. Is it like a jerking type, almost like a flutter spoon?
It just depends. It's such a versatile bait. You can fish it vertically. You can cast and retrieve. You can burn it under the surface. I fished a variety of baits at the columns on the bridge at New Maloney's, and that tail spinner was one of them. And they would hit it on the drop usually. And it was the same thing. I'd mark the fish up against the column on livescope, throw out to an individual fish. Sometimes if you don't land right where you want it, it's not sinking in front of them. I would just reel it in and make another cast. But they would hit it on the fall because that tail spinner, that's what it does. It helicopters down. The roaming fish that I was catching out in open water, they were usually 5 to 8 feet down. So it was more of just a cast and retrieve, just kind of not burning it back, but reeling pretty steady to keep it up in the water column because I was throwing a I was throwing a 3/4 ounce in that one. But I also, like at the Yakabass TOC this year, I fished it vertically, just a raise and drop,
kind of like a ice jig. You just like up and down, up and down.
Absolutely. Okay. And it's all about, you're watching the fish on livescope and you see how they react to the bait and you change it based on what you need to do to get a bite from them.
And then, guys, you guys need, he's just dropping bombs of knowledge right here, just because I know you're throwing that 3/4 ounce down there because you don't want to be throwing like an 1/8 ounce ball head Kitech because it takes way too long to get down there.
Yep.
And most of the time, that bass that you see down there are going to be moving and roaming around, so you're not going to get them in time to even be there by the time you get down there.
So that came into play at Berryessa for the Yakabass TOC. We had bad weather. We had 30, 40 mile an hour winds from the north, so it was blowing straight down Lake Berryessa. There was giant waves out in the lake. And so I picked a launch that was back in the canyons, found some pockets that had some bait balls, and you could run to a point and your bait would be there, but there would be no fish on it. And just like you said, the fish that I'm watching on livescope are mostly roaming. So you would have these wolf packs of smallmouth that would come through and hammer this bait. And you literally had seconds, like from the time you saw them to where they would hit that ball and they'd leave. Right. And even with a livescope, I was not successful in chasing them. I don't know if it was just they were moving so fast, they were being so erratic that I couldn't keep up with the transducer. But that 3/4 ounce tail spinner, that is what you had to have to get that bait down to them. They would come up. Some of those bait balls I fished were in 80 feet of water. And the bait ball would be 30 to 40 feet down. That's about where the thermocline was. And you would watch the bass would come in and just smoke through the ball of bait, and then they were gone. So you had to have a heavy enough lure to get it in the water and get it to sink to them before they left.
Exactly.
And as long as you could hit the spot with it, they were crushing it. And I actually moved up to a 2 ounce duh spoon
because it fell fast enough. I've never heard of that. Is that a Tackle Warehouse product?
Nope. It's Blade Runner duh spoons. DUH duh spoons.
Oh, duh spoons.
Yeah.
Tactical. What is it? Tactical bassin.
They throw them too.
They always throw them. Yeah.
But that's a California bait. They were made out here, developed.
Do you
out
throw
here
the pink, that pink color one?
The UV. Oh yeah, the morning dawn UV.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pink and white.
Do you think size matters really when it comes to throwing spoons like that, or you just kind of go with your confidence bait?
With the duh spoons, the action is just in the fall, and I'll throw anything from usually 1.5 ounces is about as small as I'll go. 1.25 ounces, I guess.
What is so what's the difference between when you pull up on fish like that? What's the difference between you throwing a duh spoon and a Magnum spoon? When do you decide to
I'd have both tied on at all times.
Yeah, both tied on.
Absolutely. Usually, so
which
at
one are you
Berryessa,
picking up first? Can you tell me a specific story? Oh,
the flutter spoon for sure. As long as the water's not too crazy deep, because the flutter spoon, it falls fast, but it takes a while to get down. Just because of, I don't know if you fish big flutter spoons, but they have so much side to side wobble. It's not like a direct fall like a duh spoon will.
No.
So if I call them belly crawlers or whatever, the fish that sit right tight on the bottom, if they're tight on the bottom, you could throw that flutter spoon out and catch them. If they're up roaming suspended, I would rather have the duh spoon.
Yeah, because you need to get down to them faster.
Yep.
Got it. Yeah, that flutter spoon is hit and miss,
Oh, it's so fun.
When it's on, it's on.
Even catching 16, 17-inch spotted bass on them, they're crushing a 7-inch spoon. That's a good bite.
Have you caught anything on the 8 or 9-inch spoons?
I have
the
not.
Magnums.
I throw the 8, but I get them to come and look at it, but they won't hit it for some reason. So that the 7 is my favorite. 6.5 and 7s. So I guess it's the mini mag.
So you probably pick up the Magnum, the big Magnum, if you're over at the Gizzard Shad Lakes over in
Oh,
Texas or
well,
something.
I mean, even here, I throw it
Yeah.
here. I caught key fish on it at Berryessa in the Yakabas TOC. I caught them in the Ironman at Maloney's.
Not the 8-inch, right? The 8
The
inch?
7.
The
7.
7? Okay. So 7 is like your always tied on.
Yep.
And then dust spoon is always tied on.
Yep.
Your tailspin's tied on. And it just depends how the fish are behaving. Where are they living, or are they roaming? Are they staying, or
right?
Are they deep?
I mean,
are they shallow?
That's what practice is for. That's how you determine which one you need.
Yeah. So. Have you caught fish on livescope, top water?
I have. Berryessa, watching the smallmouth or watching the spotted bass come up on bait.
Tell me about that. Tell me why you would throw that rather than throwing like an underspin or just like a really regular soft, because you know they're gonna eat pretty much almost anything at that point if they're busting.
Yep.
Right?
Well,
or if they're
fun.
like rope below the surface. It's fun, but like tell me why you would throw like the top water, and tell me like a specific story where
if they're actively busting on top, you'd almost be crazy not to throw a top water, because those fish, I mean, they're usually competing for bait. It's usually more than one.
Yep.
You get treble hooks on your top water. You catch 2 at a time. That happens a fair amount with the schooling fish. So something like a big shower blow, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I like the commotion of the top water. So, we talk about picking out a single fish and throwing to it and trying to land on it. With those topwater fish that are schooling like that and busting on bait, you can call fish from, a ways away.
Mm-hmm.
So throw in something that makes a lot of commotion on the surface, like the shower blow. You can draw fish from 20, 30 feet that you may not even be able to see in your forward-facing sonar beam.
Oh, wow. So you've had stories where you're casting out there, you don't see fish in front of on your live scope, and then all of a sudden you get blown up because they're shooting off from a different direction.
Or you see a fish on your live scope that you throw to, but the fish that you actually catch, you see come from off screen.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
What was your biggest fish story off of top water using live scope? Or have you... Okay.
I don't think I've got a big fish yet on it from top water.
Are you familiar with milliken fishing?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the style that he fishes is completely different from how I use live scope. And then, I mean, how about your style? You'd say it's somewhat different, right?
Yeah, and I don't, like I said, I don't rely on it so much.
Yeah.
I mean, there's times when I don't even take it.
Is there a time where you tied on a 8-inch glide bait and you just said, that's the only rod I'm bringing, and I'm going to live scope something that's like close to like 23 to 28 inches? Like, I'm just going to fish that way all day long.
I have at night, but the problem is I catch catfish more often than not when I do it.
Really?
At Clear Lake.
Are they suspending?
I wouldn't say suspending, but I mean, they're like 2 feet off the bottom.
And you're throwing a glide bait or something like that.
Yeah.
And you see them on live scope. Oh, a HUD? They'll eat a HUD over at Clear Lake?
I throw a lot of the Baca burritos, too. The swim bait from Baca.
Yeah.
Yeah. I throw a lot of those, and but you catch catfish on them. And I used to joke when I first bought the live scope that it made me a professional catfish angler, because, man, 9 times out of 10, when I was keying on offshore rock and stuff at Clear Lake, I'd drop on a lure on a fish, and it would turn out to be a big cat.
Most of the time, they're catfish. There was those big marks over there, huh?
Yeah. Well, and what's funny is Amanda and I went to Clear Lake. This was a couple weeks before the West Coast Championship. We went up there, and we took off. She was trying to run her GoPro and asked me if I could help her. She was having a problem with get it connect to her phone. So we had drifted way out off the bank. We were probably 300 yards out in open water. It was like 19 feet deep, just flat bottom, typical Clear Lake out in the middle. Mm-hmm. And when we got done with the GoPro, I said, "Oh, hey, since you're sitting right here," I said, "check this out. Here's how the live scope works." And I was showing her how you can count the grid marks, over to see how far away something is, and to know where to cast to it. Yeah. And I said, "Oh," so I scanned, and I was like, "Oh, see there's a fish right there." And she said, "Well, what is it?" I said, "It's probably a carp or a catfish, but watch." I said, "I can see that's 15 feet out, 20 feet down," and I had a swim jig in my hand, so I just flipped the swim jig over. it sinks down past the mark, and as soon as it went past the mark, the fish turned up on it, and it smoked it. And I set the hook, and I'm talking to her, and she's like, "Well, what'd you do?" And I was like, "It's probably a big catfish." We're watching on the screen, and I'm just reeling it up. It comes up, it was 23.5-inch largemouth out there in the middle of the lake. Out there in the middle of the lake, like 300 yards offshore, no bait, no structure, nothing. Just a single mark sitting there that was like 15, 20 feet out from us.
You're serious? A 23-inch largemouth in the middle of nowhere.
Yep. We were at least 300 yards offshore. We were 200 yards from the closest rock pile. Just flat bottom as far as you could see.
Mud.
Wow,
that's just that's like that's the fishing behavior like that. That's the fish behavior that no one really they disregard. They think livescope is cheating, that we're not studying the behavior of bass, but we're just dropping down onto them. And I mean, granted, we do that. We do use it like that, but more and more you kind of understand what these bass are doing.
Well, and I said something earlier about, you don't know how many fish are in the water until you turn on a forward-facing sonar unit.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I pulled up on fish at Clear Lake, like in a West Coast Championship, and you could see the fish sitting there. Didn't matter what you threw at them, they weren't touching it.
Yeah.
So having it does not guarantee you anything other than you get to see what's down there.
I mean, exactly. Like when I was over at Kentucky, you'll see so many marks over at Kentucky because it's a multi-species lake. And at that point, it's like, you might as well turn it off because there's so many species. That's probably Asian carp. That's probably bluegill, crappie, and etc. Like there's so much life in the water. It's somewhat difficult to actually differentiate like between all the species that live in there.
Yeah, and Kentucky Lake's kind of unique. If you're in 12 feet of water or more and you turn on any depth finder, even a traditional 2D sonar, it's constant. There's nothing but fish stacked below you.
Yeah.
But 90% of it's that carp.
Yep.
And I think that was the first time we fished Kentucky Lake for the NC, we went out and tried to do some ledge fishing and got offshore, and I found some bait balls. This is well before forward-facing sonar. But found a bait ball, and I think that was the only time I've ever fished a Ned rig. I caught like 6 species in a row on a bait ball, and none were bass.
Oh, wow.
It was crazy. It worked.
Why are you throwing a red rig, man?
Well, I couldn't get them to bite anything. I started off with a 6XD, and I caught like a 20-pound flathead catfish. And then I went to, I think I threw a football jig after that, and I couldn't get into a football jig. And so I was like, you know what? I said, I'm going to throw a Ned rig. And I, like I said, I caught like 6 different species, but none was bass.
Yeah, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's an epic story. 6 different species. That would have been great for like some Guggen content.
Yeah, so as I said, I don't
6 fish in one day.
I don't throw the Ned rig anymore.
Yeah, I hardly throw it too. It's kind of painful. It's a painful technique to throw.
Yeah, anything with a spinning rod's painful.
I don't know. It's when it's easy, it's fun, But it's not easy all the time. Sometimes you're holding it and you're like, why didn't that fish bite? Why did it turn away? Like that's not cool.
if I can't get him to the surface and drag him over the rail of the hot kayak with a line, that ain't fun.
Yeah, it's not.
I want to boat flip him.
It does win tournaments, but it's just not fun sometimes. Yeah. So where can people find you on social media? There's your Instagram. Is that majority of your social media?
Yeah, mostly Instagram. I mean, we do Instagram and Facebook. It's both under the Outdoor Power Couple. So Amanda and I are both on there. We have a blog, theoutdoorpowercouple.com. We have a YouTube channel, but I haven't put anything on that forever. I've been shooting a bunch of content, but
yeah, is that your main one? Is the Outdoor Power Couple?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. I have my own.
I
have my own accounts under my name, but I don't go on there hardly at all. Everything's under the Outdoor Power Couple.
So you guys just go back and forth with content, just sharing, whether it's duck hunting or collaborating with Tim Little.
Oh, Jeff.
Jeff Little. I'm sorry. Tim Little is from Tactical.
Yeah.
That's
so we haven't collaborated with Tim.
Right? No, not yet, right?
Yeah. No, we Matt and Tim have been friends of ours for a long time, and like we stayed at their house when we moved cross country, but we haven't done anything shooting with them.
That'd be kind of cool, like a collaboration with you with Matt. Old Town versus Hobie going on.
Yeah, it was funny when we stayed there last time. He was booked; he had something to do, and I had my boat on the trailer. It was all packed with our gear because we were moving back out here from South Carolina. And he's like, "Man, if you want to fish tomorrow, you could take my boat." And I'm like, "Man, I'm not taking your boat." I was like, "No way."
Why not? His Old Town?
No, his champion.
His champion, the red one?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. What kind of live scope do they have on their boat? Do they have?
They're running Humminbird. They're Humminbird.
Mega Live.
Yep. Johnson Outdoors.
Are you gonna hop on Mega 360?
Not right now. I think the Mega 360 is the actual 360, not the live. I think that is a more useful tool than livescope for the bulk of kayak fishing. Just because you can see what's around you. It's not so dependent on trying to steer a transducer. Because that's the trick with four faces sonar. It's directional. So in a kayak, you're trying to steer a transducer, deal with wind, deal with current, boat drift. I mean, even throwing, like I throw a lot of big baits. Throwing big baits, just the drag from the lure in the water spins your kayak. So it's a very active style of fishing. Like you made a comment when we were at Lake Lopez about how I was staring down the whole time working the transducer back and forth. That's what you have to do to maintain the view of whatever you're trying to target.
Yeah.
Whereas the 360, it gives you a picture of what's around you on the bottom. So you can cast at targets. I think like Casey Reed's got it right. He's running both. He's running the Mega Live and the 360. And I think that's pretty key because he can identify the structure on his 360 and then pick apart the structure that he finds with his Mega Live.
Yeah, I think having both is key because a lot of the times those fish aren't hanging around that cover. Yep. They're like maybe 20 yards off, 10 yards off the cover. And then
they
once
relate
in a while,
to it.
Yeah, they'll relate to it, and then once in a while they'll come to it, but then they'll be gone within like 10 minutes or so.
Yep.
That happened pretty often over at Clear Lake. They're just roamers. What's the plans for next year? Do you know?
I do. I don't have my schedule set yet, but my plan is to fish the Yakabass. I'm probably going to do all the Yakabass tournaments. Yeah.
Okay.
Fish that again.
That's very surprising news to me.
Yeah. So they have a belt. They have a Angler of the Year belt that I want. I think Pua Yang had it, and I guess Damien has won it this year. He won the TOC. I think he got Angler of the Year for Yakabass.
Is that your biggest motivation?
I want the belt. So I took Angler of the Year the last year I fished it, which was 2017. And Justin Del Campo Jr. made this giant steel plate Yakabass 2017 Angler of the Year with a big bass welded on the front of it. And I've got that. But then I guess the year after that, they came out with this belt, and each person that wins it signs the belt, and I haven't signed that belt. So
wait,
I'd like to get that.
How do you take Angler of the Year at Yakabass?
It's points that you accumulate throughout the year. They have, I think there's 9 events. I'll have to look it up. I think there's 9 events. I think you can drop 2. I think is the way it works.
You have to fish 7?
I think that's how it is.
Dang.
I'll have to check. I know that they were still writing the rules. James has been putting up a bunch of polls and stuff about rules for next year. So
if they change it to like 3 or 4 events, then I might be game to do that.
Yeah, come on, man.
Just because I know, like you guys in Northern California, heavy sticks, like you and Damien, always consistent.
Yeah. But I'm gonna fish the Yakabass. I'm gonna go back east and fish the Hobie BOS at Sam Rayburn. I think that's in September. And then we're still waiting on BASS to come out with their schedule, but I want to make 1 or 2 of the BASS events as well. The only other Hobie event that I looked at was Santee Cooper, which is my home lake in South Carolina. It's the first weekend in April, and I'd have to fly to it. So I don't know. A lot of guys offered to loan me a boat last year, so I'm sure I could get a boat, but man, just not having my stuff is kind of I don't know. That takes away from it a
Yeah,
little
it's
bit.
different. It's different, especially if you have a live scope rigged
Yeah.
up. It's kind of like, you know, to go an event without your setup, it's not fun.
Well, but there again, the live scope, I don't know that I would use it that much on Santee Cooper because that's shallow
Yeah.
water. And if in
Yeah.
April you're fishing bedfish, I mean, you're not live
Yeah.
scoping on bedfish. And,
Well,
and
you
I
fish
grew
a
up there
Senko?
rarely.
Oh
Very,
my gosh,
very
you
rarely.
wouldn't fish a Senko?
No, that's still.
Oh,
You might
no.
as well have a spinning rod in your hand.
Oh no.
I do fish it, just not very much.
Okay, I would hope to think you'd fish it during the springtime,
and it's usually on a bait caster.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Are you more comfortable skipping a Senko on a bait caster than a spinning rod?
Absolutely.
I was like that too, but then
I just have more control.
But when that Senko comes off and you're on a bait caster, it's kind of like, and you decide to cast it, the next one to go, and that thing just flies off the hook. Then you're just
how are you rigging your Senkos?
Like, let's say if you Texas rig it, right?
So Texas rig it shouldn't come off.
But what if you've gone through so many fish, right?
That's why you use a new
Senko. Or wacky rig, I mean, right?
So
if
wacky
rigged it.
So wacky rigging, I used to use the standard O-rings, but I would use 2, and I would cross them in the center of the bait. Yeah, and then put your hook under it.
Yeah.
Yep. And so I never had any problems with them coming off that way. But I started using the who is it, VMC, that makes the bands that has the ring on the outside. Yep. I started using those, and they're tight. The Senkos don't generally come off.
Yeah.
So I will throw them, but I'd much rather do it on a bait caster.
All right, so you got the Hobie event, you got Yakka Bass, and you're waiting for the BASS schedule to come out. Are you going to fish one of the BAS Opens, or are you going to fish California Bass Nation?
No, I'll fish one of the regular BASS events back east.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You know that Yak and Zach is moving out to South Carolina.
Yep. Yeah, we talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah, you guys should get together.
Zach
He's
Taylor.
a cool guy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, he came up and fished the New Maloney's event with us here this past year.
Oh, yeah. Where it was like 6 or 7 of you guys or something like that.
Yep.
You guys, they should have thrown that event away.
No way, man. That's how I caught up with points.
Yeah, that's how you caught up, and that's how John DeMonet jumped up.
Yeah.
If it weren't for that event, man, I don't know.
Yeah,
I still think you would
sure.
have a shot.
Well, I'd only fished. I fished the 2 northern events, which was Clear Lake and
Delta.
Clear Lake and Delta. I think I took 6th on the Delta.
Yeah.
And I took 2nd at Clear Lake. And then I fished that San Vicente, and I did not do well. I think I was in 21st place. So that was my other event for the points, was New Maloney's. So I had to fish it either way. But yeah, when originally John DeMonet was not signed up for it, I told him, man, he's crazy. This is like 3 points right here. Mm-hmm. And then he signed up at the last minute and came up and joined us. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did he win it, or did you win on New Maloney's?
I won Maloney's. He was 2nd.
And he won, I remember, he won Havasu, right?
Yeah. I was 2nd at Havasu.
Yeah, so you guys swapped a little bit of places right there. Yeah, it was fun watching you guys.
You talk about a stick. That guy is something. I actually watched him beat me at Havasu at the end. We both ended up on the same spot, and he didn't have a limit. He had to catch me, and I sat there and watched him catch fish after fish right there at the end.
No way.
That was brutal. And I knew I needed 3/4 of an inch. No, I needed a 2 3/4 inch upgrade to catch him, or to beat him. Mm-hmm. And I ended up catching an 18 3/4 right at the end. And that would have put me 1/4 of an inch behind him. But when I took my pictures, I had a picture that I'd cut the identifier out. So, you measure a fish in the bottom of the boat, and he measures 18 1/2. But you put him on your lap, and you can get that other 1/4 of an inch out of him. He'll touch the line. Mm-hmm. And so when I did that, I cut the identifier out of the picture. I ended up losing 1/4 inch off that fish, so I actually lost by 1/2 inch in that one.
Oh, man. That was
But it was fun.
Man.
Yeah, it was fun. I had a good time. And that one, I went to Havasu dreading Havasu. because it's known as a super clear water fishery, finesse, spinning rods. So I packed 3 spinning rods with me for the trip, and then didn't take them in the boat. Never took them in the boat. I ended up the river, fishing up the river because it was chocolate milk and it was like fishing the Delta. There's a lot of current. It was grass.
Was John in the same area?
No, he fished the lake. He fished the clear water in the lake.
But you guys met up at a clear water spot, or did you guys meet up at
right at the end on day 2? I had a spot. The only spot I'd caught, well, actually I had 2 spots I caught fish during practice in the lake. But I ran back to one at the end of day 2, and that's where John was. Yeah. And he protected his spot, and he kept me just far enough out to where I didn't have access to those fish, and he just murdered them. So it was fun watching him. It was fun watching him catch them.
Yeah.
He fishes completely different than I do. I am not a crankbait guy. He kills it on a crankbait. So it was cool. It was like him putting on a clinic, and I got to watch.
Yeah. So, makes you kind of almost want to pick up a crankbait at times.
Oh yeah. I don't know. I've never. I've caught fish here and there on deep cranks and stuff, but it's not something that I consider a confidence bait. It's kind of like jerk baits, I can catch fish here and there, but I have never had a great day on it to build confidence in it. Yeah. So it's just not something I throw a lot of.
All right, last question of the night before we tune out. But I just want to say thank you before I ask this question, and good luck to your 2023 season. I'll be rooting for you when you're over at Hobie BOS. Yeah. You get to play with the big boys like Bailey and Christine Fisher, Guillermo, and etc. That's fun. To be one of those guys it's pretty fun. You're still beating the fish, but
you have to come out and fish on with us.
Yeah, I'll try. I'll give it a shot. No promises though, because
I tell you
this year I went broke. I went for broke this year.
Those Hobie tournaments, you talk about a well-run event. That is the creme de la creme of kayak tournaments as far as how well they're run and managed. Mm-hmm. They are an absolute pleasure to fish. So, and you're right. That's where everybody comes. All the big names. The big names.
Well, I need to get a pedal drive first, so I'll let you know. and a micro pull.
Oh, but, no, you don't need one of those.
Last question. Why won't you have a bow mount motor on your Hobie?
It's
first, why do you have a Torqeedo and livescope versus a bow mount and livescope?
All right, so this one has kind of a variety of answers. I was against motors for a long time. Not that I was anti. I just didn't want one. I didn't need one. I just pedaled. Amanda got a Torqeedo. Man, she's been on the Torqeedo team for years and years. She had hers and loved it, and she had the stern mount. We also had the Evolve that goes down in the drive well. And I used the Evolve a couple times. I don't know. It just wasn't my thing. So I never really carried it for tournaments. And then this year, I guess when I came back to California, because Yakabas had blown up and the whole kayak scene out here had blown up, everybody had motors. And I was like, man, I got to have a motor to compete. So I actually borrowed her kayak for this whole year and fished out of hers with a Torqeedo 403 on the back. And I used it as an outboard. So I would run from point to point with the Torqeedo, and then I pulled it out the water and I pedaled to fish. The Yakabas TOC, the night before the tournament, I'd ordered it prior to that, but I ordered the 1103 Torqeedo for my boat with the foot steering kit from Innovative Sportsman. And I installed it the night before that Yakabas TOC. And that was the first event I used it. And for 2 days of tournament fishing, I never once touched my pedals. Never even put the drive in.
Wow.
I am a power fisherman that likes to run bait with reaction lures, run bank with reaction lures. And the Torqeedo with foot steering, I can set the throttle to 1.5 miles or 2 miles an hour. Because I have foot steering, I never have to touch anything with my hands. I can just keep a rod in my hands and casting going down the bank the whole time.
Is it a single foot like this, or is it using 2 feet?
It's 2 pedals, one on each side. But yeah, I can, because the motor is completely on the stern of the kayak way back there, When you turn that thing hard over, you can actually turn the motor 90 degrees and the kayak will pivot in place, just like it does like with your bow mount. You can spin the boat on its axis. But you could do that with a Torqeedo. A bow mount trolling motor. Oh, and the speed. I get 6.2 mile an hour out of my Pro Angler 14 with the 1103 on the back of it.
Yeah.
So it's faster than bow mounts. And the bow mount suits people who like to fish finesse. If you're the kind of guy that wants to go out and sit on a rock pile all day and drop shot, the bow mount may be a better option.
So you're saying
that's not me.
So you're saying you come across a rock pile, you're only taking 2 casts out there and you're moving on.
I wouldn't say 2 casts, but I don't spend a lot of time on that one spot. You're familiar with Clear Lake, the like Bass Alley, that offshore reef in front of Bass Alley.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go spend 20 minutes out there, but I can do that in any kind of wind with the foot steering. You just adjust your throttle until you match the wind speed, and then you use the foot steering to hold you in place.
Okay, so you don't have too much of a difficult time staying in place with the Torqeedo?
Not at all.
It's pretty good finding it steady. But if the wind changes completely a lot, then it gets a little bit more difficult to like adjust the throttle here and there.
It would,
right?
But you can also, like, if you find that you're gaining ground, you're moving forward too much, you just steer back and forth, and it slows you down just that little bit until the wind comes back up to speed or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that just takes getting used to. But literally one day, and I was good to go. Since I put that 1103 on the boat, I have not touched my pedal drive.
I think you're just having too much fun with it. I've seen you going crazy.
It is a blast. the speed alone is unreal. We're ordering another one for Amanda's. We're selling the 403 that we got now. We're going to put an 1103 on her boat as well. And it's just the power's unreal.
Would you ever put 2 motors on a kayak or no?
Nope. So too much.
You're not doing like Damien Tao?
There's no tournaments that allow you to fish that way anyway. So you still have to pick one or the other.
Except for California Bass Nation. I think they allow it.
Do they?
Yeah.
Sure?
They try to come up with this random rule.
Yeah, but I thought they did. I thought you still had to pick one or the other.
No, I think you're allowed to have 2 for Wild West and California Bass Nation.
Huh. I'll have to look that up.
But then they came up with some rule with you can't use livescope with spot lock.
I think they did away with that though.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
They did. And they have a new tournament director too.
No, just for one tournament.
Oh, just one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Brian Anonson's doing the Shasta tournament.
Are you going to be out there for the first one? The Shasta one?
I'm not going to do the California Bass Nation this year.
Oh, okay.
So, but that Shasta event, that's a fun event. Amanda and I fished it when Brian used to run it as a Hobie Worlds qualifier.
Mm-hmm.
We went up there and fished it. That's a fun lake to fish. That's a numbers lake. Oh yeah. Middle of the wintertime, you go up there and have 100 fish days. It's insane.
Are you going to be in SoCal anytime soon or no?
I will probably join y'all for an event. I don't know. We'll see. My grandfather lives down there, so we run down and visit him.
Oh, okay. Well, whenever you guys are in town and stuff, let me know. We'll have some time to get on the water, do a collab together on my YouTube channel.
Absolutely.
But thanks for your time.
Yeah, appreciate it.
You're on number 7. We've talked to a few different people, but I was thinking about like who would be great to talk about this whole live scope mess.
Oh, I love it.
And I wanted to get your perspective because you're running off of a back motor. I'm running off a front motor. So it kind of gives me a different kind of style. Like, hey, maybe there's a couple things I can pick up on so I could take you out at the next TOC.
Gotta get the speed, man. 1103, 6.2 mile an hour.
I think it's more than that. I think I need to practice on my 7-inch spooning, my tail spin, my top water, and what was your other one? Oh, the spoon. Yeah, that one. Man, you're dropping tons of knowledge on this podcast, and I'm sure hundreds of other anglers are going to love this content. I'm glad that you spent the time that you did to go over all your favorite baits that you use with livescope, and we'll just leave it at that. I'm pretty sure John DeMonet is gonna listen to this one because he's been asking for the full length video podcasts. And I've been kind of breaking them out because I don't know what the algorithm is in terms of YouTube, but I'm pretty sure like John DeMonet is going to be tuning into this one for sure. Because I don't know if it's just me, but as a hungry angler, like I always want to pick up on certain techniques on whoever's winning and whoever's being more consistent. Like Damien Tao, you had an awesome year. John DeMonet had an awesome year.
He had a killer year.
Yeah. I don't know. Anthony Garcia had a killer year in the beginning of the season, out of state, and on the Delta. So it's like I love just picking tactics from all the elite anglers out there. So we'll see, man.
We'll have to do a shallow grass one next.
Well, hit me up when you're in town.
All right.
I'll see you later, Amanda. I know you're in the back there.
Yeah.
Keeping busy. She can't hear me.
She's got our dinner ready.
Oh, okay. Well, you enjoy dinner. Thanks a lot, Matt.
Yeah, man.
I'll hit you up sometime, man.
All right.
Thanks
Appreciate
again
it.
for tuning
Yeah, man.
in.
It's a good time.
Later.
Later.